teachers make up about 68% of the country's teaching force, but only 36% of principals are women. To discuss this, I'm joined in Cape Town studio by Professor Nuraan Davids from Stellenbosch University. Her research, of course, suggesting that female principals follow very different routes in the pursuit of leadership posts in South Africa. So, Prof, I mean, the figures don't match here, but it doesn't in most cases in South Africa when it comes to a gender placement in high positions. Tell us what's happening and why.
Right. Well, the first thing is that the figures that you've just mentioned is not something that's unique to South African society. You're going to find very, very similar patterns of those figures where you have a high number of teachers in schools who are female, but that's not reflected in leadership positions. And then mostly, of course, we're going to find that primary schools in particular are predominantly occupied by female teachers. And even there you're going to find, you can have an entirely female staff, but you will still have a male who is the principal. So it's not something that is unique to us. It speaks to a deeper problem or a deeper structural situation that speaks to patriarchy and how it permeates every facet of society.
So basically, when it comes to actually appointing a principal, what is that process and why is it that we still don't have female candidates being seriously taken to, take up that position of principal?
Okay, so schools, I think, more than any other organization, probably reflects society at its best. So whatever is happening in society will be reflected in the school and vice versa. The problem that we have currently is that female teachers, according to the research that we've conducted, follow very, very different paths to males. So, for example, typically your male principal is going to be the flamboyant male. It's going to be the one who's got the gift of the gab, who's able to speak out. And automatically he is seen as being the key kind of person you'd want in a leadership position. For women, it's a matter of proving their worth before they can be considered. And so in the research which I conducted, for example, all the women that I interviewed said that they had already been fulfilling the responsibilities of principalship before they even thought about applying. And all of them agreed that had it not been for the endorsement of the male predecessor, they probably wouldn't have gotten it. So what am I saying? I'm saying that for women, it's a matter of proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can do this, whereas for the male, he only needs to prove himself once he's in the position. So it's a very, very different pathway. And we also find that female teachers take a lot longer before they can be considered. So we're looking at 20 years on average before they can become principals, and that's quite different for males. So more and more we are seeing that male principals only have 3 to 5 years of experience. Again, if they prove their mettle very quickly, they are able to access those positions.
It's shocking, isn't it, that they have to work so hard to prove a point when they already have the experience and expertise. How do we change it?
Well, look, it's certainly not going to be a simple matter of enforcing kind of gender equity policies in schools. That's not going to be the solution, which is something we are prone to do. We somehow think it's about fixing something on an external basis. What we are talking about here are deeply embedded internal processes. So it's not just a matter of getting more women to apply for positions of principal or trying to access leadership. It's got to do with how do we retain those women in those positions. Because in as much as women take longer to access and struggle to be taken seriously, once they are in those positions, research also tells us that they leave much sooner and prematurely than their male counterparts. So it's about a particular societal norm, particular constructions of how leadership is understood. And part of the problem that I encountered in the study is that the women that I spoke to had very, very different and underthought understandings of what it means to be a leader. They weren't clear about their own leadership identity. That's because culturally, religiously, in terms of societal norms, they were actually intruding on what is traditionally considered to be a male space. So they needed to find a way to navigate their own female identity in a space which traditionally is not associated with a woman. And then, of course, I mean, I'm listening to previous news clips. More and more schools are becoming spaces of violence. And so what we found with the research as well is that none of the principals I interviewed were actually directly involved in discipline at the school. So even once they assume the position of principal, they often delegate key roles such as disciplining of teachers, disciplining of learners, financial management to male counterparts. And what we get from that, for example, is that practices of leadership are associated with male strength. So there's a lot going on here, and it's not just about fixing something within a school, it's about looking at the broader constructions of society and how women are reared, and then immediately how we rear our young boys.
So what I'm hearing you say is that some women are not ambitious enough to take up a leadership position because they think it's a male-dominated position. You're also saying that women would leave a leadership position earlier than a man. Why? Why is that still the case in 2018? Is societal pressure and norms not changing yet?
It's far from changing. Stats tells us that if you're going to South African school, when you have a female principal, there are males playing particular roles in the background, and one cannot be ignorant of the fact that in South African schools, for example, is a strong structure called the school governing body, and without fail, those governing bodies are headed by males. And so particularly in our township schools, particularly in our rural schools, the male is considered to be the leader of particular communities. In fact, in many communities, you cannot appoint a principal without getting the blessing of a particular community leader. Who are those leaders? So it's not that women are not ambitious. Women are incredibly ambitious. Women are incredibly hardworking, and women are highly intelligent and smart. But within, there are particular contestations once you occupy that space, which makes it very difficult for women to be taken seriously. And here's the crunch of the study as well. It's not as if this is about a male-female dichotomy or about a male-female tension only. Women principals report that they get the least support from female teachers. So it's not simply a matter of saying it's males against females. There's something else going on here that's got to do with how we understand our roles and how we understand our identities. Because even if I occupy a high position within a particular organization, fundamentally the responsibility of the family, the responsibility of the home, the child rearing, the cooking, whatever it is, still remains the responsibility of the woman, which makes it that much harder for her to stay the extra hour, to attend to all the matters that leadership demands. So hence my argument, this is not just about fixing one particular problem. It's got to do with how we understand the interrelationship between home, family, society, and what it means for a woman to work.
Exactly, and I'm glad you brought that up, because in many instances you hear of women who are looked down upon because they can't stay the extra hour. They have to go home and raise a family. But the point is, raising a family is something on its own. It's an important part of society. It's an important part of growing up as a child. You need your mom there.
Right. And I mean, I don't think you're going to find anybody who's going to dispute that. But even in what you are saying to me, there's a problem, because it cannot simply be my responsibility as a mother. Both my daughter and my son would require access and the nurturing of a father figure as well. So within that is part of the problem, and how we understand this construction of family. And within South African society, and here it is something which is unique to us, we do have a lot more homes that are headed by women, and we do have a lot more homes that are headed by children. So, and there are many complex reasons for that. But it's not as if most families in South Africa have access to a typical nuclear family. And let's face it, it's not as if most children in society have access to a male father figure. So the woman plays a particular role, and it's very pivotal role. And so when she is seen to be spending far more time in her work, she will be frowned upon, not only by family members or by her own kids, but also by those with whom she works. Because she will be accused of saying, well, look, she puts her work first and not her family first. And it's not about putting the one before the other. It's about finding an equal balance, but recognizing that women are so much more than simply being mothers. I mean, that's just one of my roles that I can adopt, and I adopt that freely. But that's not the only thing that defines me. And I think that's part of the shift that needs to happen. We need to start looking at women as human beings, which is what feminism asks us to do, as opposed to looking at them as just as mothers. And unfortunately, this plays out in our schools, which is why we associate primary schooling, for example, with the female teacher. And that is highly problematic, because it does mean that in many, many instances, young boys never ever encounter a positive male role model in the foundational years of their education.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insight, Prof. Appreciate it.